high tryptophan or serotonin exposure will lower your testosterone. I think a person should have at least 80 to 100 grams of good protein every day, and more is okay. But it's important not to eat too much protein by itself. I had the experience of almost fainting after eating just eggs for breakfast when I was in a hurry in a cold climate. And I heard that it was fairly common for women on a diet, if they just ate eggs, to faint about an hour later, because the egg protein is very high quality and stimulates insulin secretion, which lowers the blood sugar, and that calls for a very intense cortisol reaction, and it often can produce a fainting reaction, but it always produces the insulin cortisol reaction, which has chronic cumulative effects, aging your brain cells and immune system and so on. So it's very important to not burn the protein for energy. You want the protein to be used as protein, not as a substitute for sugar and fat. So having it with sugar and fat. So whenever you eat a big dose of protein without sugar to back it up, you're going to stimulate the secretion of first insulin to dispose of the digested amino acids from the protein, and the insulin, which properly disposes of the amino acids, is going to lower any circulating glucose and tend to turn it into fat. And as the glucose goes down, that will drive up your cortisol. So typically a big protein meal will cause a huge surge of cortisol, and some people become supposedly diabetic or very hyperglycemic because they eat too much meat unaccompanied by sugar or some carbohydrate.
Now let's break down everything that Ray Peat mentioned. So the first thing he mentioned, that tryptophan lowers testosterone. So tryptophan is an amino acid found in protein. So protein in and of itself is broken down into amino acids, and different protein sources have a different combination of different amino acids. For example, chicken, turkey, egg whites would be higher in tryptophan versus ligaments, collagenous bone broth, for example, is higher in glycine, proline, and things like that. And that's the main thing that Ray Peat was mentioning. So when it comes to this video, I'm going to be breaking down amino acids, hypoglycemia, and ratios. These are the things that Ray Peat was mentioning. So let's get into it. So as you can see in this quote, the traditional meat eaters didn't waste anything. This is biblically speaking, that's how people used to eat. They ate everything when it comes to the animal. They ate the skin, ears, tails, all the organs, etc. So they had a much better balance of amino acids. Until now, still small town restaurants in places like Mexico, China, Thailand still do that. Muscle meats, to an extent, are essentially a refined food because muscle meats are very high in tryptophan, and you'll understand more as I get into the video. So anti-metabolic proteins include tryptophan, cysteine, methionine, histamine, homocysteine. If you have a high ratio of these amino acids in your diet compared to the prometabolic proteins like glycine, proline, hydroxyproline, alanine, you will have lower thyroid hormone and thus lower testosterone levels. For example, this study strongly suggests that tryptophan lowers testosterone. So high tryptophan diets lower testosterone. So that's when it comes to the actual amino acids. Next, let's go over the next point that Peat mentioned, which was hypoglycemia. The consumption of protein without glucose can have a bad reaction and increase your cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, also known as glucocorticoid. So this is a quote from Peat. It's better to take your protein during the day, sugar and fat in the evening. Food proteins stimulate insulin secretion, and to prevent hypoglycemia, cortisol is increased. So when you just eat protein, there are amino acids that will signal insulin to be released. And signal, what it does, it shuttles nutrients into the cells, blood glucose, things like that. So if you drop your blood glucose very quickly, and this is the same reason why some people have psychotic reactions when they drink alcohol, but because alcohol drops blood sugar. And I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but in some cases, a case might be dismissed if they have a condition in which a person did something wrong when they were drunk, but because of the drunkenness, the blood sugar dropped so much, so they had a psychotic episode. These experiments were also mentioned in the book by Brother Barnes, which is a mentor of Peat, in the liver book, Liver Glycogen. It's not your liver, it's something else. It's a book like that. And it mentioned how students injected insulin into their system, and instantly they would have a psychotic reaction. They would just go crazy, right? And they obviously gave them sugar to replenish that. But you can mimic that if you have a lot of protein at once, and especially if you do it first thing in the morning and you're hypothyroid, you've been fasting, your liver glycogen stores have been depleted, you're in a sensitive state, you can get that reaction. And there's no sugar to get into the cells, so the sugar that is in the blood will go extremely low, and that's called hypoglycemia. The food proteins along with tissue proteins can be used for energy under the influence of cortisol. So cortisol is a glucocorticoid, which means it helps with keeping your glucose balanced. So when your glycogen stores, which is sugar, carbohydrates, drops in the blood, and liver glycogen stores are depleted because your liver can store a certain amount of glucose, hence why the healthier you are, the longer you can go without eating food, without feeling off, anxious, or just in a bad mood. That's why kids can go long without food versus older people need to have frequent meals. The cortisol increases gluconeogenesis, gluconeogenesis creation, the creation of new glucose from amino acids, from the amino acids that you've just consumed. So the protein is getting wasted, or your own muscle tissue. Hence why people who do long-term fasting, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, they lose more muscle than they do fat because they need glucose to sustain the brain, things like that. Okay, so the food proteins along with tissue proteins can be used for energy under the influence of cortisol. So the food you consume or your own tissue. Stress or increased cortisol increases the circulating cysteine and tryptophan, which are these, from muscles, meats, and these together with cortisol tend to increase aromatase. So that increases an enzyme that converts your testosterone into estrogen. So stress converts your testosterone into estrogen. So caloric deficits, not eating enough. Also, look how it goes back around in the sense of if you're under stress, your body starts using your own muscle, and the compounds, the amino acids, tryptophan, cysteine, will signal to your body, slow down the metabolism, because if you keep this high metabolism, you're going to burn through all your muscle tissue. So this is why the body decreases testosterone, thyroid hormones, so you don't die, right? But this can be mimicked if all you're eating is muscle meat, because you're communicating with these two in your body that you're under stress, which is this cysteine tryptophan. The high ratio of phosphate to calcium in meat activates a variety of stress processes. A high intake of calcium supports energy metabolism. Sugars tend to lower circulating free fatty acids, amino acids, and cortisol while activating the thyroid hormone. So carbohydrates are super important. There was a question, why do you recommend having carbohydrates with a protein meal? It mitigates the damage produced by the stress response to hypoglycemia. So I made a graph to have a visual representation of these are the protein sources that are recommended by Peat, which are better of the amino acids. So that's ticked off. The second bit, when to actually eat properly so you don't run into hypoglycemia. So when it comes to carbohydrates, you want a steady consumption throughout the day. Fats can be as well, fats can be later. But when it comes to protein, I would look at it this way. And different proteins have a different reaction. So here I kind of have a table of like gelatin, collagen, bone broth can be eating all day because they're high in the protective amino acids. Dairy as well can be eating all day. So this graph represents what kind of foods depending on an insulin response. When it comes to eggs, they're a bit stronger. So having them more so here. Shellfish, same. It goes back around same, like not having those protein sources close to bed because they can be stimulating, drop your blood sugar, and then you be in a liver glycogen stored, depleted at night, and those waking up at night. White fish, more so midday as well. Muscle meat, same thing, more in the middle of the day, and with a combination of this. So if you use this as a guidance with proper carbohydrates, proper caloric intake, you'll see much benefits. So yeah, hopefully that takes care of what proteins to eat, how to prevent hypoglycemia, and now let's get into the ratios of how much protein should you be eating per day. So this study in which a high carb, low protein diet had higher testosterone, so it goes back to keeping carbohydrates high, protein lower end. This study showed that diets high in protein lower testosterone levels in men who practice strength training. And the minimum effective protein dose is 0.5 grams per pound of body weight. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the greatest bodybuilders ever, only consumed 0.7 grams per pound, with 60% of his diet from carbohydrates. One thing when it comes to carbohydrates, they're protein sparing. The biggest reason why people seem to, I feel better on higher protein is probably because they're under consuming carbohydrates. And when they're eating more protein, that protein can be used as a glucose source as well. But most people will benefit from actually eating enough carbohydrates and a good amount of protein. The problem with consuming too much protein is because you're going to increase the consumption of these anti-metabolic proteins, because there's no way you can completely avoid these because they're found in everything. It's just about the ratios, and naturally if you have 200 grams of protein, you're going to naturally have more of these. So good amount of protein, so around 0.5 to 0.82 grams per pound. So the maximum effective dose is 0.82 grams per pound. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that's 164 grams of protein. And also pay attention to your lean mass. If you're 40% body fat, I wouldn't do 0.82 grams per pound of body weight. I would do per pounds of lean weight. So if you're 40% body fat and you're 200 pounds, minus 40%, so that's 120 pounds of lean mass multiplied by 0.82, which equals to, 90 grams of protein around. 90 to 100. So doing it that way for an easier solution if you need help, and overall how to calculate your protein, carbs, fats, your caloric intake. If you join the brotherhood, which is there is a free 7-day free trial down below. You go to classroom, testogenesis and methodology, and calories and carbohydrates. There's a calculator. In the video I explain how to use it. You enter your weight, activity level, body weight in pounds, and then you'll get a estimate of how much you should be eating. So there you go. So yeah, that's the 3 factors taken care of: the amino acids, what proteins to eat, how to prevent hypoglycemia. Another thing important when it comes to meals, having a 2-to-1 ratio of protein to carbohydrates. So if you have 20 grams of protein, at least having 40 grams of carbohydrates with that meal. And this is especially important in the morning. In the morning, first thing in the morning, having even just a carbohydrates meal, like fruit juice, things like that. And then a few minutes later, then you have your protein with carbohydrates, especially if you're more sensitive. And the more sensitive you are, the more important this becomes. So yeah, so the hypoglycemia taken care of, and the ratios, how much protein you should be consuming. And this is how much protein I've been eating to accomplish a transformation like this. Most guys would say, oh, that's not enough protein to build muscle. It is, if you do it properly. So that being said, hopefully you got some value out of this video, and yeah, God bless.